Wurrung and the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and I extend all of our respects to the elders, past, present, emerging, and I acknowledge their continuous and unbroken custodianship of the land, the waters, and the culture of the country. And I thank the elders, past, present, emerging, for allowing us to meet here this morning. For those who have not met, my name is David Linke. I'm the Managing Director of EduGrowth. We are Australia's EdTech industry hub, and our role is to drive connection and collaboration across the sector to accelerate Australian EdTech globally. And today is part of a much bigger program, a series of masterclasses looking at the really important things that you need to do to build your EdTech business. We're gonna get started with, we have some fantastic speakers here today. We've got Matt Gambino who's with us, and Tara Roydini who's on her way. She's stuck in some technical issues where she is right at the moment from the US. So without further ado, let me welcome Matt Gambino, who's going to talk to us about K-12 school sales. So Matt is the founder of Proper Skills, helping EdTech businesses create, win, and retain sales opportunities across the USA. Matt has helped hundreds of EdTech companies and thousands of employees bring honor back to the EdTech selling and getting results. I like that idea of honor, so that's a fantastic thing. Propel helped EdTech companies develop the essential skills needed to identify and create buyers in a competitive education market. Matt, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for taking the time to speak with me today, as well as Tara. I guess she's on her way, so we're looking forward to having her join as well. I appreciate the opportunity. I have 30 minutes with you folks, I think, and then Tara's going to be following up with her 30 minutes, and then I think we're going to be collaborating on some question and answer.
Absolutely, but just on that, Matt, let me just jump in as well. And so
yeah,
just a
please.
couple of things, operational things for people. If you've got a question, just hold it until Matt's presentation, and we do have an opportunity for you to ask Matt some Q&A questions. So we can do it then. You can pop the questions in chat. If you want to, you can introduce yourself to the group in the chat as well.
That is awesome that David said that. And I'm going to tell you why. Because when we were prepping for this call, I said, look, this is probably going to be a small enough group where I'm going to urge and invite people to interrupt me and to ask questions on the chat, because that's how I usually like to present. But I think just for the purposes of keeping everything organized, David is 100% right. So you'll get 30 minutes of chocolatey goodness, sit and get from me, but please feel free to ask any questions that you'd like in the chat. And then when it comes to that time to be able to answer those questions and have some discussions, I'll do my level best to answer them. Okay. One thing I would like you to put in the chat, though, just to make sure that I am operating correctly on my side, just go ahead in the chat and just type in what you see on screen. I want to make sure that I'm sharing the correct screen with you folks. Beautiful. Awesome. Great. All right. Well, let's not stand on ceremony and get right to it. Matt Gambino, based in the United States, in the Boston area of United States. Phil's asking the question. Yeah, slide with my picture saying hi. Thanks, Phil. So I'm based in the US, based in the Boston area, and I'm almost displeased to say I've been involved in education my entire career. And that's been now well over 20 years. The purpose of my organization is really to help education companies and ed tech companies, any company that serves education, help to identify, win, maintain, and grow customers. So it's a really fancy way of saying I'm a sales trainer. Sales trainer, marketing trainer, but I focus specifically and exclusively on the education industry. The purpose of my time with you folks today is really just to give you some insight into some visibility into my experience with the U.S. education market. I struggled a little bit in preparing for this presentation, only to the extent that with 30 minutes, I had to make a decision. Do I want to try to cover everything from a high altitude view, or could I maybe forecast some things that the folks on this call might be curious about at a more specific level? And I hope it's okay. I ended up going with specific. So rather than try to give you a ton of content fast and furiously, I thought it might be more helpful to give you some visibility into what I'm seeing on specific selling challenges, specific selling situations in the US ed tech market. So I can't go over everything, but later on in the presentation, I'm going to be sharing a URL with you. I'm so grateful to EduGrowth for this opportunity. I'm so grateful to David and Imogen that I just want to offer you folks a 30-minute consulting call with me. If what you hear today is interesting, I'd love to, continue the conversation and be able to perhaps share some more information and intelligence with you that you might find helpful. So hopefully that's okay. And why don't we just go ahead and get started? So the three items, we don't have to just limit the discussion to this. You're welcome, Ben. We don't have to limit the discussion to this. But the three items that have really been recurring on my radar, especially over the last year or two, are what you're seeing on screen right now. So the first question I always get from companies that I work with is, Matt, should I hire former educators? There's a huge market of former educators who are looking for work in the United States, probably in a lot of other countries as well. We have educators that are just running for the exits here. Educators are, put under a lot of pressure, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of unfairness, quite frankly, in terms of sort of being maligned by students and parents and government and federal government groups and things like that. So it's not I always think of teaching as a calling, and the folks who teach are, sort of, lending themselves to that calling, but it's becoming very, very difficult to teach. And so as a result, we're having a lot of teachers look for greener pastures, and that's great for ed tech companies. So the first question is like, should I hire former educators? Let's talk about that. The other item that I'm seeing quite a bit of is, standard operating procedure for a lot of companies, and perhaps it's the same in the Australian market as well, is, there's some sort of pro forma kabuki theater dance where, you go in, meet with an instructor or an educator or two, have a meaningful, productive conversation. And the strategy is like, you know what, we should give them a proof of concept and go right for a free pilot. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I want to give you some sort of insights into my thinking on that, so that you can consider it as you continue to sort of come up with your plan and planning to, move into the education market. So I want to talk about pilots and specifically free pilots. And then the third item is an age-old thing. This isn't just last year, this is for all time. And that is, if I'm selling into K-12, depending on my solution or my solution stack, Matt, what should I do? Should I be, selling to districts, large districts, and trying to, canvas that high level to win, large appreciable sales? Or is it more advantageous to work at what we'd call the building level, right? So we have school districts in the United States that, can be small. The district that I'm involved with in the town that I live in, we serve about 3,000 students across 4 schools. And we have a lot of vendors calling into the district. Some of them will call at the building level, try to sell something to an elementary school or a high school, secondary ed, or we'll try to sell something, a little bit more expansive to the district. So I want to talk about strategy as it relates to working districts versus working buildings. Okay, so hiring practices around former educators, working on free pilots as a business strategy, and then essentially a growth strategy in terms of hitting districts or hitting schools. So if that makes sense, and if we're in the right place, go ahead and type in yes or go, and we'll just go ahead and get started. Regardless of where we start, I'm going to start at the beginning with former educators. One of the items that I would sort of suggest that you consider as you think about, expanding your businesses in the U.S. or starting your business in the U.S. is this. This is going to sound diminishing, but I really don't mean it to be, because I love educators. I love working in education. Having said that, educators don't know how to buy stuff. In the US, there is just no formal process for adopting product and for procuring product. And the evidence is, just ask them. When I work with salespeople, I always sort of make that thesis statement, and I challenge them to just say, hey, next time you go in and you're speaking with a curriculum director, assistant superintendent, teacher, professional development people, ask them, hey, how do you adopt product? And you'll get every sort of reactive deer in the headlights explanations that you can think of, but it's all improvised. So I really do mean it when I tell you that selling to educators, you really want to sort of consider the fact that they are more or less improvising on how they choose and evaluate product. And so, what I really try to stress to the companies that I work with here is that you've got to consider being very, very intentional on your process. Now, that doesn't mean sort of being salesy. It just means being aware that districts and schools don't have a formal procedure for making decisions. And my theory is that they appreciate it when their vendor can come in and suggest one. So there is an art to it. So what I do when I work with companies is I essentially help them adopt a predictable and repeatable process for approaching customers. Okay. A lot of the folks that I work with, as I mentioned, are sort of chock full of former educators on their sales teams. But I want to make a couple of statements about it. First of all, I think there's a huge opportunity for ed tech companies to hire the right way and to get good talent on board. And you know, if a good percentage of those people have spent time in the classroom, I think that's great. But having said that, I find that former educators are really struggling and searching to try to figure out how to be successful in the ed tech companies that have hired them. And the first problem, I think, is really a problem of self-identification. I can't tell you how many former educators I work with in the first sort of foray, first workshop, where they're like, well, you know, Matt, I really don't consider myself a salesperson. You know, I'm really not in sales. I'm more of a trusted advisor with my customers. You know what I mean? I was an educator, and I think that my customers are looking for a trusted advisor that they can work with, and I fulfill that need. I'm like, that's great. That's totally fine. So advise them. My particular sort of flavor of advice is to help them honorably consider product and solutions that are going to help them solve educational problems. But I think it's sort of miscast. What you'll find, if you haven't already, is that when you interview former educators, uh, you'll find that they don't look at selling as an honorable profession. They don't look at it as a credible profession. They think being credible means they can't sort of expose themselves as salespeople. They're too worried about being viewed as a trusted consultant, as a trusted advisor. And so it's kind of difficult to explain, but what happens is they come in and they just have a lot of meetings. And the meetings are great. The meetings are feel good meetings. You know what I mean? Like they know how to ask questions about funding. They know how to ask questions about, you know, not having passed some standardized assessments at the state level and being put on a performance plan. They understand how to ask all of those questions. They have that fluency, but it very rarely, without the right training, it never materializes into putting an opportunity in motion. And so what happens is they'll go back and talk to their manager. It's like, how did your meeting go with Austin? Oh, it went great. We had a great discussion. You know, I think he's really interested. It was a great discussion. And so the next meeting or the next month, another conversation with Austin and another conversation with Austin. Austin's cool because he's getting some free advice. It's very low pressure, but no one's making a decision to do anything. You know, and so finally the manager's just like, well, what's going on with the school? You know what I mean? Where are we in terms of, you know, being able to close this thing? And that's what former educators can be allergic to out of the gate. They almost feel like it's disrespectful to help, in this case, Austin, consider a solution and consider whether, you know, it's going to be able to provide him with capabilities that will help him meet his educational challenge. It just doesn't go there. Okay? So educators like to come in my experience, and introduce themselves as former educators and say to things like, you know, I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm just here to advise you. Well, wonderful. You're not going to sell anything. Okay. So what I would advise you to think about if you are looking to expand on your team and looking to sort of mine that market, which is a strong market, I would just tap into what I would call their situational fluency. So what educators are really good at is being able to demonstrate through their meetings that they could do the job of the person that they're interviewing. I mean, to me, the brass ring is for a prospect in K-12 to say to himself or herself, geez, Matt could work here. He could teach here. You know what I mean? He's outlining challenges that he's hearing that they may not be 100% what we're dealing with, but I can tell he talks to a lot of people like me. And that's what I believe former educators bring to the table. That's where their credibility lies. It's not the fact that they were former educators.
But then I had to leave as well.
Oh, I think we've got someone not on.
I'm glad you feel better.
Hey,
I'm
can I
sorry
just
you were
ask,
there.
Aaliyah, can I ask you
Yeah,
to
thank
mute,
you.
please?
Yeah.
Can you just mute? Thank you.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Thank you. Okay. So I believe that's where their credibility lies. Their credibility lies in being able to demonstrate that they could almost do the job. And that's powerful. That's wonderful. But what it requires is a way of not just articulating that, but then, sort of using that as a prompt to help Austin. I keep looking at Austin because he's right on my screen. So he's like my role play, helping Austin. Hey, Austin, helping Austin open up about his particular situation. And then it requires then some, real finesse and precision around the discovery meeting. But sometimes educators just don't get there because they don't consider it a process. So long story short, I would urge and invite you to consider, fortifying your team with people who have educational experiences, but just don't be, fooled into thinking that, okay, just because they've taught, all of a sudden I'm going to have a huge Rolodex of opportunities and people are going to, look at my company as being really credible and we're going to win opportunities on that basis. It just doesn't happen. Without sort of the right sort of process that you can formalize with former educators, you're actually not doing anyone any favors. They're going to feel really under pressure, really under the gun. You're going to be looking for results, looking for performance, and they're not going to be able to do it because of that sort of initial misunderstanding of where they bring value. Okay? So former educators is a really big one. Okay, the second item is pilots. So just by a show of hands, you could do it in the chat room or just I can see you on screen for those of you who are on camera. How many folks right now are selling ed tech solutions, and how many of those folks get into the business of honoring test pilots, proof of concepts, free pilots that educators can use? And David might have some input on this.
Can I ask you to explain the options again for me, Matt, and how you wanted people to respond, because I missed that bit.
Oh yeah, sure. No, I was just curious.
Yeah.
For the folks, for the folks on the call, how many of you folks use free pilots as a selling strategy? So you sell something. How many of you folks as a selling strategy will use free pilots? So Ben's saying not us. Matt is saying definitely us. Or it may not be relevant. No free pilots is our policy. This is great. I actually like to hear this.
So I'm
Gary,
going to jump in. Whilst we wait for people to respond for you, Matt, let me give you my experience after 20-something years selling to schools in Australia. And all of these people who are saying no free pilots, no free pilots, no free pilots, or thereabouts, I'm going to say to you that almost invariably every edtech company I've worked with, someone is offering a free pilot. And typically those free pilots, and I may be stealing your thunder, don't have a structured project plan and set of metrics for success to determine what the next step is. And I also think my experience has been that many pilots are unpriced. So even if success, people they're hiding away from the price. So they're not saying, oh, look, if this is successful, it's going to cost $63,000 or it's going to cost $150,000. So they almost set themselves up for failure, but that might be part of the story you're about to tell us.
Yeah, I think there's some connective tissue there, David. Thank you. So I think this gets back to a lack of process in terms of how people buy. And that is insidious because to me, in my experience, that improvisation leaks over onto the selling side. So here's typically what happens. In the US anyway, there's this almost sort of unwritten shared understanding that the school should be getting a free pilot. It's almost as if there's a theory that, without a free pilot, they can't make decisions. So what happens is, and I don't even think that this is anything that is planned or manipulative on the educator side, but typically what happens is that the salesperson will talk to a decision maker, maybe not the final decision maker, maybe not even a specific, maybe just an influencer. But what happens is the educator who's constantly pressed for time, who doesn't have a formal way of buying, will say something like this: Imogen, this sounds awesome so far. I really, really like what I'm hearing. I mean, it sounds really, really good to me. Here's what I'd like you to do. I think this would be the great next step. go ahead and send me a couple of logins. Send me a couple of accounts. Your timing is awesome. I want to get this in front of some of our educators and have them take a look at it. And we're going to get together and, sort of go over what you have and what some other vendors have. And based on what you're telling me, this looks like a really good opportunity. I want to run it up the chain, run it up some of the people that, I report to who help make some of these decisions. So that's really what I'd like for you. Oh, and by the way, if you could just send me some marketing stuff, any materials that you have that fully get into the product and get into your company, I think that will help as well. Now, the problem is all of that comes from a place of goodness. I like what I'm hearing. Send me some stuff. But because it's improvisational, that improvisation leaks over to the sales side. And so people who sell to educators, unfortunately, it's why I really love my job. It's like, oh my God, this is great. I've just hit pay dirt. Like, I'm going to go back and I got to get them these things like right away. We are in the game. Okay. But what they've done unwittingly is they've completely lost all control over the process. I don't know many people who work at schools who can sell. I just don't know a lot of people who can do it. They can sell to kids, they can sell concepts, they can engage children, but helping a complex organization buy product is not in their wheelhouse. So the last thing that I can afford to do in this business as a salesperson is lose control over my process. So what I coach companies to do in the US, because I'm glad to hear at least 50% of the people who answered my question are like, we don't honor free pilots, but that means the other 50% says we do give free pilots away. Okay. First of all, this isn't sacrosanct and it's not binary. It's not a yes or no thing, but we've got to really consider being a little bit more thoughtful and planful on how and if we give these things away, because there's absolutely nowhere to go. So free pilots, the whole philosophy in this country anyway, is misguided. There's some unwritten rule that we're supposed to do it. And the problem is that since COVID, particularly the year after COVID ended officially, I've been working with a ton of companies who are struggling because they've got a ton of people using a free version of their product and they are not winning any revenue. And now they're trying to have these hard conversations to say, like, if you want to keep using this, you got to pay for it. And that's almost like a non-starter. Okay? So my suggestion for your consideration is to think of a pilot as what I call proof. Think of it as proof. Okay? So when I talk to an educator, when I talk to an educational buyer, I am much more bold about saying something along the lines of, Aaliyah, I'm 100% sure that we can help you solve this problem. I just want a chance to prove it to you. Will you give me that chance? And will you take a serious look at my EdTech solution? You with me? Because then I can go to Aaliyah and say, okay, Aaliyah, I'm glad that you're serious about this. How would you like to evaluate me? And Aaliyah might say anything. She might say, well, I want pilots. I want you to fly me to Florida because I know you do a conference every year. We need you to come in and do a huge presentation. I want references. But what I would suggest that you coach your salespeople to do is not to agree to any of that. Write it down, but don't agree to it. Because then you have something to bargain with. Okay? So what is the biggest sort of missed opportunity, or the biggest challenge that salespeople struggle with in this country is they can't get to all the decision makers that they want to get to. Remember, districts don't know how to buy. So there's a huge cast of improvisational characters that have to consider the product. And so what you'll find, and maybe it's the same in Australia, is you'll find that salespeople will say, well, who are the other decision makers there? Now, I find that to be diminishing. If I'm speaking to Aaliyah, I find that to be diminishing to Aaliyah. Aaliyah, I'm enjoying this conversation, but who are the real decision makers? Okay, that's almost an insult. So what I would rather do is I would rather ask Aaliyah, how would you like to evaluate us? And get Aaliyah's evaluative criteria. And then I would like to ask a question to Aaliyah that's rather uncomfortable, and that is this. Aaliyah, I know it's in the future, we're not even there yet, but if you decide you want to use us, what would have to happen in this district? That gives Aaliyah now cause to give me workflow. And what Aaliyah will typically say is like, well, we have a new business manager and she has to sign off on any purchase, regardless of how much it is. And what I would teach the salespeople that work for your companies to do, and what you might want to consider, is ask for that meeting. You know what I mean? So Imogen is our business manager. She has to sign off on everything. Can I meet Imogen? Can you introduce me to Imogen? Well, of course you can't, because I haven't even seen anything. By the way, I told you I wanted a free pilot and some other things. Well, see, now I have something to bargain with. Aaliyah, I'm not sure of the very best way to prove to you that we can give you these capabilities that we're talking about. Whatever I choose will cost my organization resources, but you have my commitment. So Aaliyah, if I can make the case to you, will you then consider introducing me to Imogen? Is that fair? And now I can choose how to prove to Aaliyah. There's nothing written in, Sanskrit that says it has to be a free pilot. I can decide what that proof is. Aaliyah doesn't have to agree with it, but I can decide what I feel is the best path forward. Okay? And if I can then, now I'm in a much, much stronger position, because if I can make the case, if I can prove to Aaliyah that we can help, Aaliyah now owes me something. And what does she owe me? An introduction. I'm not leaving it to Aaliyah to try to do my selling for me. She's not sort of traipsing through the district, trying to figure anything out. She's not ghosting me. We have now a shared commitment. I will do something for her that costs my organization resources. And if I'm successful in proving it to her, she will do something for me. I can't help myself. I'm Sicilian. I can't do anything without getting something in return, and vice versa. Okay? So it's an often sort of, ignored skill that we really don't have a lot of in this business, because let's face it, education is a touchy-feely business. They'll tell you it's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. It's all about the kids. That's great. It is. However, the school needs, certain capabilities to be successful, and our companies need certain, resources and revenue to be able to reinvest in these great products. And that, in my view, that needs to be socialized. It's almost as if we have these conversations with educators, and the only thing we don't talk about is the actual business. And I believe that has to change. And in my experience, if we can do that well, we actually really see our sales improve. Okay? So to me, free pilots have a place. In my view, paid pilots have a better place. But if I use them as a way to bargain for access to other folks that I need to be meeting with. If I leave it up to, in this case, Aaliyah, to do my selling for me and to try to, to run things up the chain, so to speak, I'm not going to get very far, and I'm just going to be constantly pestering Aaliyah for something that she really is not qualified to do. No offense, Aaliyah, you just look like a very nice person, so I'm using you as a role play. All right, good, thumbs up. Okay, good. Okay, cool. So happy to talk more about free pilots. One other item on the subject, though, what you're looking at right now is, quite frankly, what I would suggest, and this is being recorded, and I'll certainly share these slides with you. I cannot tell you how many organizations I work with, and when I research them, I'll go on their homepage, and the first thing I see is a big button that says schedule a demo or ask me for a pilot. Okay? Why is that a problem besides what I just talked about? Educators are busy over here. They are under some serious, serious time pressures. It's funny. You meet with an educator, they're like, I have 15 minutes for you. I don't even have 15 minutes for you. Okay? So the problem with, in my view anyway, sort of inviting overtly, hey, book a demo with me, okay, is that the educator, will see that and say, yeah, cool, I want to see a demo. Rep is like, this is great. I've got a lead. Okay. But I can't have a discovery meeting with that educator, because there's a false there's no alignment on the purpose of the meeting. The educator's purpose of the meeting is just show me something I don't know anything about. The salesperson's purpose should be, here are some things that we're seeing from other schools that are similar to yours. These are some challenges that we've been seeing from them. We've been able to help, but enough about us. Tell me about your school. Tell me about your situation. So there's a misalignment in the purpose of the call. And when we're reactive and there's no process, we really can't do anything but, just, be reactive in that call and just show them something and hope that it resonates. Okay. So what you're looking at right now is if your particular, approach is I get leads through demos or pilots or something like that, I would double and triple down on the wizardry and the wizards around qualifying that person to be even able to see a demo. Why do you want to see a demo? Tell me about you. Tell me about your school. Tell me about your students. Are you looking to consider something now? Okay. How do you do this, the work that you're doing right now, what you're teaching, what's your teaching approach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And only then will we then say, okay, now we're going to book a meeting. But in this meeting, I want to be able to, give you some points of view that I'm not able to capture right now. And then at that point, we can make a decision as to whether a demonstration is going to make sense. Okay. Kind of like free pilots, demos were just way too quick to the draw in this country. And it's really sort of diluted the value of these products. And it's kind of minimized the ability for the reps to be consultative. Okay, lastly, buildings versus districts. There's no sort of one size fits all answer to this. It's all about the strategy. What is your strategy in terms of growing the business in the United States? It has to go back to a strategic plan. But a couple of ground rules that I'll give you in the US anyway. Okay. Individual schools have a certain level of autonomy, not a big level, but a certain level. There's no one, there's no like, centralized answer. But essentially, if you have a product that's $10,000 US or under, a principal can essentially make that decision. That's pretty much the budget that they get in the US on autonomy without having to get buy-in from the district. Okay. So if your strategy is, I want to start with buildings and land and expand, I'd be just conscious of price. Because as soon as you get over that $10,000 threshold, a principal's not going to be entertained. You will be able to really even entertain it. You might be able to deploy a discovery meeting with that principal and bargain for access to, let's say, the director of curriculum or the assistant superintendent or the superintendent, but there's not going to be any autonomy. So one thing to consider is that if you have a low price, low kind of ceiling on your price, you can move in buildings if you feel that's going to be a worthwhile strategy for you. So price and by the way, a building decision can be made a lot quicker and typically is a lot quicker. Whereas districts, you're talking about a cycle of at least a fiscal year, if not longer. Okay. Matt, could you also relate your advice to higher ed? I was prepared for K-12, but in higher ed, it's fairly similar, except that you're not dealing with a building or district dynamic, Ben. But the same sort of rules apply in higher education. Very little way in the way of a formal adoption process. So a lot of these, these concepts that are given you are applicable to higher education. But we can talk more about higher ed after tonight, after this meeting, if you'd like to. Okay. Okay. But lastly, what I would say is just sort of mix up your diet. You know what I mean? In terms of, you can target a couple of big, sort of districts and assign one or two salespeople to, kind of work those longer cycles. But you might want to fortify that with school-based sales, knowing that you can get to them quicker with a little bit more agility and a little bit more velocity. The only other thing that I wanted to say in just the last couple of moments that I have is that in this business, you guys, these sales are won and lost in discovery. And we do a very good job in a lot of cases of shortchanging that discovery meeting. Okay. Meaning like, what's your budget? Do you have a need? Do you have buying authority? That might work, if you're selling to somebody like Boeing, but it really doesn't work in districts. Okay. So I would really impress upon you the importance of insisting on a productive discovery meeting or meetings. Okay. And that just involves being able to share some insight for free. Here's what I'm seeing in other schools that are similar to yours. Okay. And then getting that person to open up about his or her particular educational challenge, regardless of how subtle or discreet it is. And then use that discovery meeting as a way to flesh out reasons for the problem, impact on the problem, not just in the one classroom that the person's teaching in, but across the organization. Cost of the problem. Do you have teachers running for the exits? Is the fact that you're not passing these standardized tests costing more in professional development spend? Does that mean that you have to hire more substitutes? That sort of thing. Okay. So reasons, impact, cost, and then finally, capabilities needed. And if your reps get really good at it, they'll conduct that first interview without getting into product at all, just challenges. Okay? So I believe my time is up, but I did promise you a resource to be able to meet with me. You're looking at it right now. My website is propelskills.com/edugrowth, and you can book a free 30-minute meeting with me. I promise to be respectful, even more respectful than I'm being now. So you can ask me questions, I can ask you questions, and we can get a little bit more into the specifics of your organization. And with that, I'll say thank you very much and hand it back over to David.
Matt, I love working with salespeople because you gave us insight, you gave us a framework, you gave us structure, and you finished on time. This is amazing stuff. So well done. Before you go, because we are going to get you back. So just for everyone who's messaging me, we're not going to lose Matt. We're going to hear from Tara about higher ed in a second, and then we're going to come back and have a bunch of questions. I actually wanted to put up a poll. I don't know if Imogen's ready to go with it, but I thought it might be a really useful idea to ask which sector you're currently in, because that gives us a bit of an insight of where we're splitting higher ed or K-12. So we'll get that done. And Matt, we'll see you in about half an hour, but you're here, and don't feel that you don't worry about answering questions in Q&A if they come to you. We'll come to them in the chat. We'll come to them, or we'll get them all later, so you can do that. And so now I want to welcome Tara, who's going to join us on stage. And I just need to get my bio for Tara here because I want to be really formal. I've known Tara a really long time, Tara. We've known each other, I don't know, maybe nearly 7 or 8 years now. I first met you when you were doing strategy work for FutureLearn at, I don't know, was it Monash? I'm thinking one of those, I can't remember. You're on mute, by the way. You're still on mute. Tara? Tara, can you hear me? Can anyone else hear me? Imogen, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear
me now? All right,
now?
perfect. Tara, now I've got you. All right, well done. I don't know if it was Monash or Deakin we first met.
No, it was a Deakin. Remember, your office was the glass one, and mine was. We had those 2 cubicles that we had the FutureLearn sign up.
I vaguely remember that now. I vaguely remember that. Anyway, Tara is CEO of Sage Education Marketing and founder of Collaborate, and has got more years experience in selling to higher ed around the world than most of us have in any other thing. Her experience is doing strategic development to help universities consider revenue diversification and how they can use some of the big strategies and the big things happening in universities to start to differentiate their their revenue. A whole bunch of stuff, and we just heard from Austin. I don't know, are you still alive, Austin? You had a massive groan there. I hope you're okay. All right, good. And her lots of experience working with Aussie edtech companies as well, and has helped a number of edtech companies establish in the US as well. So I'm going to hand over to you, Tara. Thank you very much.
Hi, and you guys, I'm a consultant and I talk a lot, but I'm a little on the technically challenged. So let's see if I can do this right, okay?
No, we'll help you.
Where is my screen? There we go. So I'm going to start this, and basically thank you for including me and letting me do this as I get this started.
I'll let you know when we can see your screen, Tara, if you're sharing.
Can you see it?
Not yet.
I said share screen, so I'm not quite sure how to do that. Can you see it?
Okay, so down the bottom, you'll have a share screen, and then it'll come up and it'll allow you to pick the option of whether you just want one window or you want an entire screen. So from there, you then click what you want to share, whether it's an application or the thing, and then at the bottom, there's a blue button that says share.
So I'm on share screen.
Yep.
Let's see. Let me try this again. Again, this is my technically challenged thing. So it came up with share screen. It says select a window or an application.
Yep,
right?
Pick one of them.
So I want to select a window.
And then there should be a blue button that says share down the middle and the bottom of that. There we go. And let's just check that we've got your screen and not your shopping list for tomorrow. Okay, we have your presentation. Awesome. We've now got you. You're ready to go.
Okay, and I will try and be on time, but as everyone who knows me knows, I can talk paint off a wall. So if I start going over, please, don't hesitate to say.
I will help you stay on track, Tara. Don't worry.
So I have to start this off by saying that we have an elephant in the room right now. I've really in talking about this and how do I structure this, because we really don't know what's coming. If the Department of Education is truly going to be defunded and dismantled in the US, it's going to change a lot of things. We are a huge elephant, as one of my friends had mentioned in a previous meeting, that when you come into the US, you look at it as this awesome opportunity, which it is, but it's massive. We have 4,000 higher education institutions. It's like a $60 billion industry. And, right now it's changing rapidly. I'm in Louisiana, which is about as red of a state as you could possibly get. Louisiana State University, LSU, has just announced that they are freezing all future purchases, all budgets, all hiring decisions for the next year until they understand where this is going to fall out, which is going to make it difficult for anybody to be looking at decisions. Okay. But that isn't the same thing that's happening in California, which is doing just the opposite. They've decided that they're going to be increasing their state spending for their universities. So, right now, it's like, what's going to happen? We don't know. It's an elephant in the room, but I'm going to go forward as I have in the past and talking to my clients. So what comes out of all of this is a tremendous opportunity for international companies. As the US is switching away from DEI, it's switching away from federal funding programs. There are great opportunities for you and other international companies to be that resource. And so I think that, every cloud has a silver lining. This is the silver lining for international companies that have started relationships. Because when I talk to universities and when I talk to administrators, they're looking for partners. They're looking for people that don't have to adhere to some of these regulations and requirements that are going on there. And so I think it's really important, particularly when you start looking at helping states that are not currently set up with some of these education standards, funding, and programs. We don't know what's going to happen to low-income students because the Pell Grants are such a critical piece, and that's all federal funding. So just kind of an overview, we have 4,000 higher ed institutions. We have public, private, community colleges, and historically Black colleges and universities. It's a $600 billion annual expenditure. What's going to come out of this is a potential need for teacher training. Anyone that has options to provide teacher training from an international company is now being looked at by every university that I talk to, because that is going to be no longer available from the federal government here. And there's obviously a growing demand for workforce training. By 2030, which is now a very short 5 years from now, the United States will have 75 million people fully out of the workforce. That's the last of the baby boomers who will be retiring. And there has not been any kind of growth within the population control, which is one of the reasons why they're really trying to push for population growth here to meet that need. So workforce development is critical. For us, when you start talking about it and going with what the previous talk is, there are people who have individual responsibilities under the traditional budgets. Your provost is over academic affairs. They see curriculum and strategy. Your information officers review tech. Your deans are the ones that you really want to go into when you're talking about adoption of technology, and your procurement officers. So if you want to look at selling into universities, for example, it's really critical that you not only meet the people that are going to be using it, which would be necessarily the professor, the instructors, and the deans, but you also have to understand who the procurement officers are, because they can block you by just not allowing you to submit an RFP. But they can also give you the information that you need to be considered for that RFP. So when we're talking to people, we really suggest that these are the people, these three people here, the chief information officers, the deans and department chairs and professors, and the procurement officers are the people that you really want to be getting to know. And that the deans and department chairs and professors come under the faculty as well. The students are really good about recommending technology. A lot of these professors are not, and don't use the latest in technology. And COVID forced them out of that. They had to learn how to be able to teach online. They had to be able to learn how to communicate with students. And most of them turn to their students for recommendations on what they should be using. There's kind of a joke right now in Louisiana about Signal, because LSU went to Signal for all their internal student conversations instead of Slack. And now there's the whole thing about how they have to move back to Slack because Signal's not safe and stuff. And the kids are laughing about this because none of it's any different. But somebody heard something in the professors, and so they decided they're going to change. And it's important to really be staying on top of that and hearing those conversations. The sales cycle is important. So there's an awareness stage, and that's where the 6 to 12 months beforehand comes in. And this is all under the traditional model. Universities start their budgeting process in April. They have to finalize them by the 1st of June, and budgets are released in July for the next year. You have to get into that cycle almost a year ahead of time to be in consideration for the evaluation stage, for your pilots, your trials. And just to go back to what Matt was saying is, I don't recommend free pilots because there's too much integration that has to go through with systems. And they don't want to, if they're going to invest in changing what they're doing from a technology perspective, and they're going to have to adapt and integrate, they don't want to be doing that unless they've made some kind of a decision where they're going to go with things. And then there's a procurement process, the negotiations, and then your onboarding. So it's really a long cycle to get into higher ed. Again, this is all based on the traditional values and the traditional models. When we're talking to people, community colleges are probably the least impacted by the disbanding of the federal government, because they really rely heavily on state funding and community funding. A lot of cities are involved in it, and a lot of states. The public universities are also state funded, but they depend on federal grants, and that's where the Pell grants are coming into this. The private universities are in endowments, and if you look at what Harvard just did, which is anyone who comes from a family under 200,000 has free tuition if they can meet the academic requirements, and anyone under a family income of $100,000 a year, they actually are getting a full ride, including books and housing. So that, they're a private university, and they're building off their endowment on that. The historically Black colleges and universities, their Title III funding, and that's going to go away. I mean, that's diversity focused. That's the whole premise of those schools. And now with the DEI removal, that whole funding is gone. So they're scrambling right now to figure out what they're going to do. And fortunately, a lot of the big nonprofits like the Bill Gates Foundation and I can't think of what her name is, Melinda Scott. They've just donated the largest amount they've ever done to historically Black colleges and universities. So that money is now going to be coming from private grants and foundations. And then you obviously have your for-profit institutions with investment. So it's really critical to decide where you're going to fit into this. Are you looking, if you want to be in a big public university, for example, University of California or the California State Universities, those decisions are made individually, but they're also made collectively. Virtual California, which is online courses, is available to every community college student in California. And there's 236 community colleges in California. So, you know, one may decide to use the technology, but if it's taken into the virtual California, it goes across all those community colleges immediately. So there's two ways to look at how you're going to budget and how you're going to fund things. And it's whether you're doing it as part of the collective group or whether you're doing it as an individual one-off. These are kind of the cycles. If you look at a public university, they have a fairly long cycle. It's 12 to 24 months. Private universities are much more quickly to adapt, but they do a lot of things that are around research. So they want to partner with you on a kind of a research approach. And if you're doing some kind of new technology and you want to, you know, they've got a project going on with that technology, you're much more likely to get into that community and be able to present and work with them. The community colleges are very workforce sensitive. That's what they're looking for. So if what you're offering is anything to do with skills or workforce development, this is your sweet spot, because they're really actively trying to approach this, and they're working very closely with industry to be able to implement this. We have just right now, Hyundai is putting in a new steel facility, and the reason they chose we have parishes here in Louisiana. The reason they chose the parish they did is because the community college that's there actually has courses that are around steel manufacturing, which is one of the few community colleges in the country that is doing that. So they're bringing that whole new facility and factory to this little tiny parish because of the community college. The HBCU is much more mission driven. And again, that's a long process because of the fact that they have limited funding and because of what they're trying to accomplish. They're very careful. But I'll be honest with you in saying they tend to be very focused on opportunities with companies that meet their diversity. If you are, you know, a minority company and this is your focus, they're going to give you more attention coming in as an international company, because that's what they really want to promote. They want to promote opportunities for minority companies. Opportunities with what's happening is in teacher training. States are now seeking alternative training solutions. I get a lot of calls and a lot of emails from different education departments within the states asking for recommendations right now. The micro-credentials and the certifications are really big. The state partnerships and workforce development initiatives. And if you look at some of the people that are attending the conference next week, ASU GSV, you're going to see that there are a lot of focus on workforce development and skill development right now. What they're really looking for is developing cost-effective competency-based training. They want things that partner with the school districts for certification and to provide alternative licensing pathways. These are some of the procurement processes you have to do. This is a lot of information and I'm trying to rush through it so that I stay on time. But if you have questions, please say something. In the public institutions, it is a state procurement process. You do have to register. It's a request for proposal process, and you do have to have some type of referral or recommendation to be considered. So it's important that you understand when you're talking to your people what their process is, when they expect the RFPs to be coming out. And I often offer them help in being able to write the RFP from a technology perspective, because that's not their area. The vendor list for K through 12, and Matt can talk more about this, is, you know, they really do look for pre-approved vendor lists. They want to know who else has used you, where you come from, and how they can maximize that kind of relationship. And that kind of goes along with part of what he's saying about former educators, because if an educator has used your product or has used a similar product and they know of you and they've met you at conferences, that's going to go a long way towards you being put on the approved vendor list. Private institutions pretty much do what they want because they're working with endowment money. And then there is right now still a government schedule for workforce grants and partnerships with nonprofits. It has not gone away. I looked at it today and it's still there and you can still register with it. So one of the things that I would recommend when you come into our market, if you haven't already, is to attend the industry events. Leverage partnerships. If you can come with a trade mission like David has done in the past, I think that's really helpful in getting to meet some people and having mutual conversations. You know, leverage your partnerships. Pilot programs, but when you pilot a program, back to what Matt was saying, is we don't recommend a free program. We recommend a partnership. They're doing some kind of project. You want to be able to capitalize on the data that they're generating from that project, and you want to go into it as a partnership. You need to make sure that you're in compliance. Obviously, that's a given. And then you want to help them develop thought leadership. You know, professors are always looking to get published. When you're in higher education, they're looking to partner so that they can get that research out there, and they're looking for testimonial. So if you're in a position to be able to help them and partner with them to be able to get that information, that's going to help you a lot for getting into that market. These are some additional resources. What was really interesting to me is in the unthinkable becomes reality with the higher education in the wake of the department, is that they really are pushing here the importance of building partnerships with international companies. That, you know, they're saying, get yourself prepared. And this is talking to the US institutions. Get yourself prepared, develop, find these partners, and get ready to work with these partners outside of the US, so that you are not restricted in how you're being able to develop things. Research is really being impacted here. It's, you know, they're stopping the grants and they're stopping the research money. So these universities are really looking for partners to help them develop this, particularly where it appeals to diversity, working with replacing public funding and social policies, climate change. If you're involved in any kind of climate change activities or climate change technology, that's a huge push for, because it's not available in the US right now. It's all frozen. And then we also have a lot of people that are looking at how are we going to promote and support marginalized students. If we're going to take away from the accommodations, which right now has been taken away, the funding for those accommodations, where are we going to be able to getting these students the help they need? And if you're offering that through technology and it can stay something that's accessible, that's a great partnership for these institutions here right now. You know, it's really about understanding the institutional needs and decision cycles, and they don't even know what those needs are right now. So it's a consultative type relationship, identifying the key people that you want to work with. And, you know, if you want to be working in, you know, schools or states that are going to be much more responsive, I would suggest you really look at those with the highest education opportunities. If you want to build strategic partners for expansion, look at the states that are struggling with higher education and struggling with performance. And I can send you a chart that shows where that is. And then really invest in the understanding what the compliance and regulatory is going to be here. You know, it probably sounds ludicrous to you, but here at Louisiana State University, which by the way has 42,000 students, every professor was given 2 weeks to scrub the word diversity from their curriculum. And if they didn't do that and they weren't in compliance in 2 weeks, regardless if they were a tenured professor or not, they were going to be suspended. So that's what's happening here. And so understanding what they're facing and understanding what they need your support with is really important. And I'm not trying to sound negative. I'm just trying to flush this elephant that we're all kind of dealing with right now. And explore the funding opportunities. There may be opportunities away from that institution that you can partner with funding. And they will know that. They will know which foundations they're working with, which foundations are supporting them, and where you could go to get that kind of relationship financially, and how you can use that to your advantage as a leapfrog into the country to build your market. Am I on time? Because I think that's the end of my.
I'm very comfortable with that. It's fantastic, Tara. Thank you so very much. We might ask Matt to join us again. If you want to stop sharing, if you want to click end share for us as well, Tara. And then the three of us can have a conversation. Whilst I'm doing that, can I, yeah, so just click stop share. Imogen, can you stop share at your end?
I think I did.
Ah, perfect. All right, cool. Okay, so this is the opportunity for anyone to ask some questions. I've got some that I want to start with, and we want to jump into those, but I do encourage you to add questions into the chat, and then I'll come to you and get you to put some details around your question, because some of them I may not recall, because it was some of you sent your questions in during a presentation. I don't know what bit you were referring to, so I'll help you with that bit. I want to start with a really open, simple, what I feel is a simple question, but it's the one that I get quite a lot. I want to talk a little bit about sales team structure and compensation plans that you're seeing in the US and what they might look like. Matt, I might get you, I've got a slide I'm going to share. So this is some Australian benchmarking that I did. I don't remember when it was. I think it was earlier this year, in which I was working with a couple of EdTech founders, and we're thinking about sales plans and compensation and stuff. So just for clarity, on the left-hand side of the screen, we're expecting people to be hunters. On the right-hand side of the screen, we're expecting them to be farmers. So you can use whatever language you work, and we might ask you to translate this for us in a second, Matt, what that would look like in the US, and maybe Tara the same in the higher ed space. So in Australia, what we found was, if you are a hunter, you're out there building your own lead, you're generating, you're primarily selling to big institutions, large, in this instance, it's K-12, so it's to Catholic dioceses or state school systems or a series of independent schools. We were seeing base salaries of $130,000 to $140,000. Generally, for the commission plan on top of that was about $50,000 to $60,000. Just for Matt and Tara, this is Australian dollars as well. Everyone else would know that. And they're expected to generate about $1.5 to $2 million worth of business every year. So you can sort of do the maths. It's anywhere between sort of 10 and 12 times their package. Then we get to what we call sales reps, or they're still focused on new business. In this case, they're generally getting most of their leads from the marketing team. They're not generating them themselves. They're expected to prospect within a lead to find the correct contact, much like what Matt said, find discovery and find out who's the decision maker, not just do a demonstration for the year 5, spelling teacher, actually go find the right person. Base salaries of 80 to 120, commissions of about 20 to 40, and expected to be somewhere in around the 750,000 through to about $1 million. Now, these numbers, surprisingly for EdTech founders here, the bigger the company, the lower that total compensation plan was, and the higher the expected revenue. Just as a statement, smaller companies were paying slightly more for their staff and expecting lower results than bigger companies. And I think it comes back to the point Matt was making around sales process and the maturity of that and how they can do it. And then finally, you can call them customer success, you can call them account manager, you can call them retention, whatever language you use. Primarily, they provide support, first and second level support. They're primarily providing what they're expected to be able to provide: product, advice and insights. They're expected to manage the entire renewal and seek growth in that account. Typically seeing an $80,000 to $100,000 base salary. This was late last year, early this year. Not very few have commission. They have a bonus if they hit a certain retention number, but very few have a direct commission. And back to Matt's point, what we were finding is if they were a past teacher, these people were being paid a little bit more than non-teachers in this role. And I think it's because around the product advice and insight stuff. And they're expected to, in this instance, manage 400 to 500 schools. So that's just to give you a bit of an idea. Matt, did you want to give us a comment on what you're seeing in the US from a compensation plan perspective and whether or not these numbers make sense or you would think slightly different experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in my experience, this is very similar. I mean, very, very similar. There's a couple of key differences that I wanted to point out, but when I just want to qualify that by saying that, possibly the same in Australia as well, but here in the US, these companies are sort of all over the place in how they structure their organizations. But what I will say is that even from the, sort of like the dollar perspective, um, this looks pretty much in line with what the companies are hiring for in the United States. A couple of nitpicky things. So on business
Yeah.
development manager, 1.5 to 2 is I think usually it's a bit of a broader range. I would say like 1 to 2 is
Okay.
essentially what they're expected to generate per year. Um, but one key thing to sort of look for in the U.S. Is that a lot of the organizations here will hire what they call a sales development rep, an SDR. But the SDR is quite different from how you're defining a BDR here. So
Yep.
an SDR is essentially responsible. It's low level. It's almost entry level, maybe a couple of years of sales or marketing experience. But what they're asked to do is to ask what I call sort of height and weight questions. You know what I mean? Are you still serving this many students? Are you still, is the student to teacher ratio still this? Are you still using this product, like this competitive product? Do you have a budget for this type of solution? So it's very kind of high level questions. And the SDR in that case is almost responsible for actually doing the qualification for themselves. So I'm an SDR. I ask those questions, and if I get yesed to death, it's like, cool, I'm going to put this one over the transom to David, who's the account executive. So you've got an SDR who's really responsible for trying to qualify leads, in my opinion, not really set up to do a very good job of it. And then David is then asked to then come in and have, quote, the real discovery meeting. But they're not really doing anyone any favors because the educator has already thought that they've asked a bunch of questions. Now David is sort of asking the same ones, but a little bit more deeply. So
That's a
that's
really
kind
good point, Matt. Can I just comment on that one before you go ahead?
yeah.
Just because people in Australia may have a slightly different experience, I don't think that's common in Australia. I don't think it's common to have a multi-handoff sales process, certainly in K to 12 schools. I think because of price point, it may happen more in higher ed. But I think it's actually one of the feedbacks we had a few years ago when we were working with Indian companies trying to come to Australia, was that they have a very structured multi-handoff process, and it actually hurt them significantly in the sales process in Australia because the Australian customer almost felt they had to start again with each new person. So
Yeah.
I'm interested in that's a really good point, Matt. Sorry, you were going to make another point before I.
Yeah, no, but you've just inspired me to do one other bit of detail on this side of it. We do a lousy job here of prospecting. So one of the things that David has on his slide is like primarily closing business from, market qualified leads. A lot of companies are getting lazy over here and just like expecting the leads to come in over the transom from watching webinars or downloading research papers, and that's fine. But in my view, those people have kind of already gone down the road with somebody. They're already kind of making their decision. So one of the things that's to me table stakes in this country that we're not doing a very good job of is just proactively picking up the phone, getting on email, and asking for discovery meetings. And that requires a little bit of heft. It requires some persistence, some patience persistence, but we don't do a good job of that. So if I had my druthers, if you guys were, looking at expanding into the US or penetrating the US market, I would pay a little bit more for someone to get new business and put that person in charge of prospecting. Like, you get the meetings. Get the meetings. When you win the meetings, then do the meetings and take the opportunity forward. Now, and lastly, what I would say on the customer success side, that's kind of split down the middle. We have a lot of companies here that are still like putting their customer success in charge of what I would just call fancy tech support. They're putting out fires all the time. School doesn't know how to use the product. They don't know how to implement it. So the customer success is constantly putting out fires, being reactive, trying to make the customer happy. And by the way, swooping in once a year to try to renew the contract. It's really not doing anyone any favors.
I
So what I
agree,
feel
100%.
yeah, so what I feel customer success has a lot of opportunity to do better here is to be what I would call research and advisory with customers. You know what I mean? So, come up with some success metrics. How are you expecting to be successful with this product that you're using? And let's meet on a regular basis to make sure you're hitting it. You probably won't every month, but that's why I'm here to marshal resources to get them together so that you are more successful. And what I find when you do a really good job at that, you can then sort of lead your own discovery meetings when it's good for you. So it's just like add something to the agenda once every few months and say, hey, I want to share with you what we're hearing from other schools, new challenges that we're seeing, but I want to get your perspective on it. That's research and advisory. And if they're having the same challenge, well, then I can start to upsell and do more share of wallet with that school. So I think one of the problems we're seeing in the US is customer success is being very reactive. They're just doing button pushing, but they're not kind of having that sort of that heft of being a true research and advisor person that can help the district spend more money.
I think I'll bounce off that, then I'll ask Tara the same question. But I think, Matt, what I observe is that customer success in Australia, in many instances, not all, becomes the Hail Mary department, and their job is to try and save that customer who's actually not been using the product for the last 6 or 12 months. And there's a big invoice that's about to go out, so they start over servicing and doing absolutely no discovery and research and development, as you said. So, Matt, thanks for the insight. I'm going to pop over to Tara and ask exactly the same question. What sort of salaries do we think we need to pay in the higher ed space for these sorts of roles, Tara, in your experience?
No, I think I'm along with Matt. This is pretty consistent. What I think may be different here than what you're used to with all the different levels is there's this sense within the higher education space of this hierarchy needs to be followed. So, your entry level business development, sales prospecting person works at one level. And then as it gets kicked up, the next level of salesperson comes in and kind of has the next level of conversation. So, the president or the provost isn't necessarily going to talk to someone who's a discovery skill setter. They're going to talk to the person who's ready to put the proposal together or talk to them along those lines. And, they really have been conditioned to expect this type of approach. So that's why we have so many layers. I think it's inefficient. I mean, having been that salesperson and having, once I start that relationship to have to kick it off to somebody else, I don't think, continues the right process that you need to do. And I never went along with that myself, but that is how it's pretty much set up. So I don't think there's anything different. Obviously, you have to add the package here that you guys don't have to add. You have to add the benefits, the healthcare, and all the other pieces that go into it to keep people, wanting to stay with you. And that's the biggest issue I find with salespeople here is they move so many times and they start to build the relationship because it's a long sales cycle. And then they switch to a different company who's going to pay them a little bit more or give them a few more benefits. And then you've lost that whole process and you're starting all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly an experience that I see as well. I'm going to bounce to some people who've got questions in the Q&A, and then I'll come back to some of our structured questions. Ben, are you still with us there? I see your camera's off, but I don't know if you're with us. But if you are, pop your camera on and unmute yourself and jump in and ask your. You had 2 questions. I won't try and guess what the first one was connected to because that happened during the middle of someone's presentation. You can go back to that and then jump into your next one.
Thanks, David. Thanks for the presentations, guys. Really cool. I just want to ask on the timelines, Tara, you presented and the procurement processes. I just wanted to check there. Is that for every price point, or are there certain sweet spot price points? As like what Matt mentioned for in the lower ed sweet spots to get in under the heavy procurement thresholds.
It really depends on what the institution is, how large the institution is. There really isn't a threshold when you come to the private institutions. If you've got, somebody that's running a department, a dean, or a researcher who wants to work with you and they've got a budget to do it, they're going to do it. I mean, if you're $100,000, $1 million at Stanford or Harvard, and they've got that kind of money, they pretty much can make their case and bring you in. If you're working with a community college, they pretty much are restricted to about the $10,000 range before it has to go up. And usually in a community college, it goes to the board. So, you know, it's really a different process and a much longer cycle. When you look at the HBCUs, they have very little budget. So they're sitting there struggling to figure out how they're going to do things. And that's where you can work with the foundations or the grant people, that you can bring money into them at the same time. So if you can work with somebody that's, you know, looking at, for example, you know, and I'm just going to use an example, but girls who code or women who code, and you've got a foundation that's doing that, and you want to work with something that you have that's around that kind of technology, if you go in together as a triangle, you're going to get much further along because they're going to be funding that research.
Yep. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. And my other question was just, it sounds like keeping on top of the news and how each states and districts are reacting to the government changes is going to be really key for you know, targeting what you're going after in the US. How do I do that? You know, I'm particularly interested in higher ed, but I imagine a bunch of the folks would be interested in lower ed. Like, what are the best news sources to keep tabs on? So I know, okay, California has just increased their budgets, but Louisiana has frozen budgets. You know, and without going insane, because the US volume of news is mind blowing at the moment.
Well, I think Matt, I defer to Matt on it too, because he's in Florida, which is also, you know, we only have a couple of universities. I think we have 7 universities in Louisiana. There's a lot of universities in Florida, and they're doing a lot of different things. But, you know, I recommend that you just subscribe to the news publications, Inside Higher Ed, Chronicle of Higher Education, Higher Education Drive, and I can send this through. And the U.S. News and World Report are really good about keeping up to date what's happening. And then there's some professional associations, the American Council on Education and National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, NASFA. I'm sure there'll be a lot of stuff at the NASFA conference this year in May that will be around all of this and the impact it's having on higher education. You know, maybe Matt, maybe you have something else that you think.
Unmute there. I'm sorry. Yeah, thanks. So Ben, what do you sell? What's the product?
We're a student support platform for higher education providers.
Student support. What kind of support?
So, you know, we help universities bring all of their student support services together for students into one-stop shop, tutoring, mentoring, counseling, advisory, and proactively recommend the right services at the right time.
Yeah, so I mean, I would echo everything that Tara says, but I would also be sensitive to your statement about like, how do you look at all this stuff without going crazy and without sort of like over functioning and overthinking about every particular state that you're working in. So what I typically, you know, the educators themselves already have that on their radar. So I always ask myself, why would I sort of duplicate that work? So what I do is I try to impress upon them some insight on how they can. Here's how I define value for a school and a business. I'm either making money or saving money. Now, schools really don't make money, but they can save money and they can lose money. So rather than get like into the weeds about like grants and funding and what the government's doing, I always sort of hypothesize that educators know that stuff to a large extent. I like to get into conversations with them about what are the implications of not having a platform that's able to support all of these particular student needs. Well, no matter what state you're in here, you know, higher education is like absolutely petrified of not getting enough students in their funnel and not being able to retain the ones that are in there, right? So if you can sort of impress upon them the fear of right now spending all of this money on disparate platforms and disenfranchising students and everything like that, they can start to connect the dots themselves to sort of say like, geez, no matter what the government's doing right now, like I am losing students, I am bleeding students, I am hemorrhaging potential students. And so it's going to be worth me sort of taking a look at a potential investment where I'm going to get some return like over the long term. So I kind of flip it on its head. Rather than get into a discussion about the challenges that a state may or may not be facing, I try to get a little bit more sort of situationally fluent and say, like, right now, what kind of students are you not entertaining in your example, for example, what kind of students are you not entertaining in your pipeline, and how are you not able to retain students using some of the workflow that you're doing right now? So I would sort of instill that sort of fear into them about not using your company. If that makes sense.
Thanks very much, Ben and guys. There's a couple of other questions I want to jump to this, and I'm going to go to. I'll actually begin with the first question, and then I'm going to come to you, Aaliyah. So if you want to unmute yourself and put your camera on, I'll come to you in just 1 second. I just noticed Tara's just stepped out for 1 second. Matt, can you just give me an idea of the importance of landing your first school, your first customer, your first logo, whatever language you want to use, and what you think about sort of this idea of tier 1 logos, tier 2 logos, and things like that, and whether or not that makes a difference to sort of wider sales penetration?
That, I don't have an easy answer for that. I mean, so is it, when you sort of tier 1, tier 2, are you talking about like maybe getting a reputable institution one and then being able to use that as a reference or sort of a
Exactly. So, for
ones?
example, we always hear people wanting to go to the LA Unified School District because it's, it's a whale, right? Like, let's get this whale and then others will follow. And I have a particular view on it, and I just wanted to see if you have a view on it. That's all.
Yeah, so I'm not a real, like, I'm more of a fan of, sort of looking at a particular school and socializing a problem and trying to get that school to consider buying me. I don't really get wound up in the school itself. However, it's not lost on me that the LAUSDs and the New Yorks and all that stuff, they're absolutely huge. They're more practiced at entertaining vendors and buyers than others. So to get my first logo, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in those big whales. I'm probably going to get sort of other ones. And the other reason why I do it that way, David, is that I find that the more I try to impress upon a prospective school that I have like a big school, the less they care about it. Because a lot of the educators that I work with, they think that they're the only game in town. They don't care what other people are doing. They care what they're doing. So the only other thing I'll say to it is, like, I hate it when salespeople come in and give a presentation and they start with what I call the NASCAR slide. Here are all the other schools that we're working with. I find that educators really don't give a shit about that. Excuse my language. They're, you know what I mean? So I try to almost, go the opposite and make that school feel like they're the only school in town. And that's a little bit more convenient because then I don't have to worry about these giant schools. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and a little anecdote before I ask you the same question, Tara, which is what my comment to people is: who in the world uses it, who in Australia uses it, who in Victoria uses it, who in Melbourne uses it, who's in the north of the northern suburbs use it. Because my experience in K-12 schools is principals and teachers want to know if their friend up the road is using the product, and that's valuable. But having the tier 1 independent schools from Sydney talking to Melbourne customers is of less interest to them. But I see your point. Tara, same question to you, and you were just out when I asked it, which is, how important do you think it is to get sort of tier 1, tier 2 university logos on your platform as you're beginning a sales process?
Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you a story. Duke University, big name, big brand, right? So Duke University now tells startups that come in, oh, we're happy to work with you and you can use our brand, but we're not paying you because you're going to get all this business from using our brand and saying that we work with you. So, it's almost the reverse psychology. Like, I don't go after those big brands because they're far more difficult to work with. Everybody's trying to go after them. What we really look at doing is like what Matt was just saying is, what's in their area that they're losing students to. So if they're, seeing an attrition rate and their population of students and their neighbor schools, whether it be in their same state or in nearby states, are all of a sudden seeing a growth, I use that. I mean, if we're working with them, we can say, hey, we've helped this, grow, and their population has come up from this because we're offering that. That's the approach that we look at doing, not the, hey, we've got Harvard or we've got Stanford or we've got whatever, because so what? I mean, they've got the budgets to go after everybody and their brother. They're not necessarily, going to influence somebody.
Just on that thing about Duke, I actually went to a session at ASU GSV in maybe 17 or 2018, in which the then CIO, a lady named Betty, I'll remember her forever. I don't know if she's still the CIO there. She actually said that from the stage, which she said, we work with 6 startups a year, highly competitive. We don't pay you. Our logo will get you business. And in fact, you should probably pay us, but we'll forego the fee, right? That was essentially the message. So I'm glad to hear that they've not changed that message. Aaliyah, you've been waiting patiently to ask your question, so feel free to jump in and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. I've just been immensely enjoying this session. It's got so many interesting bits of knowledge that I didn't know. Our product mainly targets or tries to offer the new solution around assessment integrity, which is a standard that is called assessment integrity in Australia. I'm curious about what the equivalent of that is in the US, assessment integrity, because I'd like to build a strategy around that. And just any thoughts on how we can approach this concept with this product. And I can give you a little bit more background about the product if needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaliyah. I would love to hear a little bit more background. The parlance that I hear a lot is just academic integrity, but the integrity word is definitely this. It's pretty ubiquitous here as well. So assessment integrity, testing integrity, academic integrity are all the ones that I think the secure assessment products are using. I don't know if Tara hears anything different.
No, it is really much on the basis, because so many courses are now being offered remotely, and there is the challenge of how do they really know who's doing the assessments, particularly when they're not requiring them to come in and be proctored. So assessment integrity is, I think that they talk about assessment compliance, and they talk about integrity from the validation perspective. So that's kind of the messaging that they want, is how are they validating that student? And then, what's the integrity behind that assessment? And then how do they secure that assessment once it's been completed?
Aaliyah, can you just, high level, what's the solution? Just tell me a little bit more about it.
No worries. Our product is a research transparency product. It's designed to show the person doing the research behind the scenes before they produce a work, which could be an essay or, sitting an assessment. So it captures the screen when you're doing the research, and it captures you as on the webcam in intervals. So it's a time lapse or a screen capture of research, and it can then be uploaded as a link to your essay, showing that you've done the work and it's not an AI, copy and paste. And it also is supposed to combat contract cheating and reinforce academic integrity. So that's the high level sort of description of the product.
So is this higher education only, or is this K-12 and higher education?
This is higher education mostly, but I think our product can definitely service K-12 to high school as well. It's for students doing research work that is, required for them to do by their teacher, and then they have to show they've actually done the work and not just copy pasted an answer from Wikipedia. So I think it can service all levels of education.
So, I mean, you didn't ask this particular part of it, but I'll say it anyway because I can't help myself. And you may already be using this approach in Australia, but what I would really touch upon in higher education here in the States is the reputational damage done to the college, because I think that there's a lot of stuff right now going on around assessment integrity, testing integrity, and that sort of thing. So what I try to do when I work with companies of that sort of nature is to, sort of think about what's your mission and purpose in the university. Most likely it's something around making students competitive in a 21st century global workforce, right? And what are the implications of, not being able to meet that standard and meet that mission if people right now are, mining AI and mining Grammarly and everything like that? What does that do to a brand that, quite frankly, right now is damaged in the United States? People are making really hard decisions on whether college is worth the tab. Right. So you're probably already doing that to a large extent, but that's the sort of the sales focus that I would sort of touch upon. How can you really beat your competitive colleges that you're trying to get students into by ensuring that your product is truly meeting the standard and you have evidence for it? I'm a big solution selling fan, and that to me is like a huge opportunity for solution selling. How do I separate myself from the other colleges?
Aaliyah, so that we don't turn this into a one-on-one coaching session. I love the thing. We might just move on because there's a bunch of other questions.
Well, that's my fault. I got
up.
into the weeds.
No, I'm very comfortable with it. I love the opportunity. I like people with salespeople. You see gap, go fill it. Awesome. Thanks very much, Leah. I'm going to jump in with a question, then I'm going to come to, I think the next in my queue is probably Phil. So if you want to get ready for that. I had a question for you, which is almost impossible to answer, and we'll spend a couple of minutes trying to do it. I want to think a little bit about pricing strategy. I was wondering, Tara, if you want to give us a bit of an idea of what sort of pricing models are you seeing most common in the higher ed space in the US right now? I'm going to ask you the same question, mate.
So, I mean, that's like,
that's
universe.
A whole nother webinar. I get that. I really do. Yeah.
I mean, for what product? I mean, where are you looking at all this stuff? So, it's obviously a competitive space, but it's also a space where people are used to spending money. So, I think that I can't really answer that. Are you talking about integrity assessment? Are you talking about a new LMS? Are you they could be anywhere from 10,000 to tens of millions.
Okay. I guess just before you go, Matt, I guess the thing I was thinking about, Tara, is I guess there's a couple of ways that people are selling software, right, in the higher education space. One is there's some sort of revenue share model where they're sharing savings. I don't know if you're seeing that. And the other one is for licensing fees based on a per student, per college, per campus, per whatever. Are there others that I'm missing?
Well, they've gone away from the revenue share type situation. That's really become in the higher education space. That's not working anymore, and that's part of the whole process that's evolving with all of this. Licensing fees are one of the things that they're doing, but there's also a model where they do licensing fees up to a certain level, and when they start seeing the success of the product, then it goes to a flat fee, annual renewal fee on it. So,
okay.
For the first, X number of students that do this based on this outcome that you expect to see, and then it goes from there.
Awesome. Matt, similar comment, question?
Yeah, what Tara just said, I would be 100% in alignment with, but I am typically, my approach is like Tara said, I mean, it really depends on the solution, it depends on the product. I really can't comment on pricing because it depends on what you're selling. But I think what, Phil and I have been chatting a little bit online here, and what he would probably agree with, he can give me a thumbs up if he agrees, is like, what's the cost of not using it? And that's a part that I think a lot of salespeople in this country miss. And they miss it because they're either afraid or unaware to ask like the right questions. So I talked about it before. If there's teacher turnover going over to school, you can very confidently make a statement that the average cost of a teacher turnover in this country is $20,000 right off the top. You turn over a teacher, it's costing the district $20,000 in municipal insurance, pension, help, that sort of thing, right? So if you can make the case that, oh my gosh, over the last 3 years, you've lost 10 teachers, it sounds like you've got a $200,000 problem here just in that area alone. Right? So what's the cost of not doing it? And the reason why I think that that's important, besides sort of understanding pricing trends and everything, is that as early as the first discovery meeting, you can sort of be a little bit coy and just say, look, I'm not a mathematician, but it sounds like you've got a $500,000 problem here. Now, all of a sudden, your solution isn't that expensive. You've demonstrated a bit of a return on investment. And if they think that they are losing $500,000 a year, which they might be, believe me, they'll find the money. They'll find the money to stop the bleeding.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can I jump to you, Phil? Phil's got some questions, and then I think we've got the first one in gets the last question. So if somebody's got the last question I want to ask, so Phil, over to you first, and then we're going to go to our. You've got a couple of minutes, and then I'll go to the final question in the first one that I see come up.
Thanks there. Thanks, David. Firstly, thank you both, Tara and Matt. We're really appreciating this. Obviously, what's really topical is in the next 24 hours, President Trump's going to announce a global tariff regime. From
But
software
he might
companies-
remove it the next in 15 hours later, Phil. So let's not get too enamored by this. It could be on this week, off next week, off 3 weeks later, blah, blah, blah.
Dave, happy to have a side bet on that one. Really happy
right.
to. I'm an economist, just to give a heads up. That's my background.
Over to Tara and Matt.
Yeah. So, and yes, as Matt's aware, I use solution selling. Now, one of the things is I recently landed 2 major contracts in the US. Well, 2 contracts in the US, my first higher education, my first university, and my first district. And interestingly, they wanted to move really rapidly to make sure they access funds made available from Congress, right? Because they're afraid that these programs are going to dry up. But moving forward, we're worried about what's going to happen with tariffs and the implications for us, because the people, when we sell, we're selling under the free trade agreement, whereby Australia does not require us to charge our goods and services tax, which is a benefit for us. But what do you think the implication is going to be? Because, you know, we're not selling a physical product on site where an importer has to pay the tariff, right? So how's that going to, you know, do you think that's going to be good for us in some ways, or it's business as usual?
Phil, I don't know. I just I don't know. And if I would be lying if I tried to come up with something, and I'm just not that kind of person. So I have to just plead complete ignorance on what those tea leaves are telling us. I just don't know.
And that's the whole problem. And that's where we all are right now, is nobody knows. So everybody's kind of in this holding breath, because, you know, he could put a tariffs in today and take them off tomorrow. You know, and it just kind of the zigzag that goes back and forth. One of the things that I'm suggesting to, and this is based on financial advisors that I have working with me, is that you keep the money out of the US right now. You partner with people, but don't set up the bank accounts, don't set up the financial investment here that could be frozen, because, you know, it's just right now, it's just too unknown.
Yeah. Okay, that's good advice. I appreciate it. One
All
more
right.
question. Just one more
Yeah,
question,
go.
David.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Commonwealth, the federal government, do you call it federal government over there? But anyway, the Department of Education through Congress funded a special post-COVID program to help address the literacy competency gap that had occurred. It's about a $6 billion program. It was funded through to the end of 2026. Recently, the department was forced to go back to district level, where they would have to put their hand up saying, yes, there were about 3 or 4 different programs, right? Now, do you think that with the dissolving the Department of Education, that Congress will pull that funding, or do you think the funding will just get split out instantly to the various states?
I'm so glad this isn't CNN. I have no idea. I can't. You know what I mean? I'd be the worst. I'd be the worst guest. I just don't. I don't know. It's not in my wheelhouse, Phil. I'm so sorry. I wish I could be more helpful.
No, that's okay. I appreciate it.
To answer your question again, you know, like Matt says, we just don't know, and to give you advice would be wrong, because, you know, it's not there. If they truly do dismantle the entire Department of Education, and of course that's in the courts right now, you know, that money is supposed to revert to the states, but there's no process at the moment for it to do so. So, you know, they have to, it's a whole new structure, and, you know, nothing in our country at that level happens overnight.
Thanks very much,
Thank
Phil.
you so much. Thanks,
Thanks
David.
so much.
Thank you, everybody.
I'll just make a comment, and Ben Hallett's question or statement, I think it's not actually a question in the chat there, is this a bad year to begin selling in the US? Probably. It's probably the answer. It's going to cost a lot of money. The Australian dollar is at not quite record lows, but it's pretty low. So the salaries that we're looking at make it really hard and expensive. So I think what I just wanted to do now is just really finish with a question for you, both you, Matt and Tara, which is what's the one thing that we need to take away thinking about selling to universities in the US right now?
I've been going first too much, Tara.
Yeah, I did. I think I asked her.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that I think 2025 is a bad year. I think it's an opportunity for you to build relationships and be a solution provider for people who really don't understand what's coming and are scared. If you can get in now with some of these people and start building these relationships and talking to them about how you can support them, I think you've got a leg up. Because everybody in the US, the companies that you compete against, are kind of in the same holding pattern at the moment. I'm sorry, David, can you repeat that question again?
What's the one thing you want us to know?
Well, I mean, that's basically the one thing I think but I think you also need to look at this as an opportunity and look at where these gaps are going to be. If you take away the Federal Department of Education, what did that Federal Department of Education offer to the states or to the schools? And then look at the products that you have that could offer those same results.
Matt, same question.
What I would add is, right now, and this isn't just because of what's happening on the federal level, but because of persistent inflation, unforeseeable fixed costs that have been very, very volatile. At the municipal level, schools like at K-12 are just being absolutely starved. Like they just, the COVID party is completely over. It's in the rear view. They have been keeping schools afloat. COVID funding has been keeping schools afloat, and now that money is gone. So they don't have any money. So I would just go back to Phil's sort of allegiance to solution selling, right? How are you going to continue to serve your students, and how are you going to continue to be true to your mission at this district with the absence of these funds? And how can possibly our solution help you stop that bleeding and save that money? That's what I would sort of take away from it. And then very optimistically, I think for you guys just coming from Australia, I think if you can come in with an international point of view, I think that would actually be embraced right now, because right now in the United States, there's a lot of gloom and doom. People are like looking at each other with uncertainty, what's going to happen in this country. So if you can come in from another country, what I mean, say, here's what we're seeing internationally, you should consider it. You might just be able to win some meetings that your US counterparts will not be able to get.
And I'm going to add one more thing to this, which we didn't really approach. The homeschool environment, the homeschool community in the United States is growing exponentially. And it's not just about what's happening with the Department of Education. It has to do with people being mobile. It has to do with school shootings. People don't want their kids, exposed with all of that. It has to do with in Louisiana, we have a very rigid 10 commandments have to be in every public school and things like that. So if you've got solutions that can support the homeschooling communities, this is a great opportunity as well.
That's a great point.
Awesome. I said we're seeing something very similar in Australia too. We're seeing a growing, not exponential growth, but we are seeing lots of parents moving to a homeschool environment, probably where you guys were maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and there's all sorts of reasons for it. So, Tara, Matt, thank you so very much for your insights, your thoughts, your presentations, your data, the whole lot. We'll make the slides available to the group and we'll send them out to you, which will also include some contact details for everyone. So thanks very much, Tara and Matt. I've just got a few things that I want to finish with, so thank you very much. I'll share my screen. We have this is a series, so this is the second in 6, I think. So there's another one coming up. So we're doing a session now on selling to schools and universities in Australia. It's on Wednesday, the 14th of May. And then there is on the 2nd of July, developing pilot programs. On the 13th of September, pricing strategies. On the 19th of November, building your product roadmap. we have an offer for you, which is it's $1,250 for the whole series. So you can sign up by just simply emailing hello, and we'll get you a registration code. Some of you have been attending these sessions as part of our partnership with Investment New South Wales, but I do remind you that Edge of Growth is a membership organisation, and Investment New South Wales supported us delivering this for you if you're a New South Wales-based company. But you will receive a membership proposal in the next couple of days so that you can sign up and become a member as well, so we can continue to do this important work. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for being with us and wish you a great day. And I think Imogen will play our video out.
See you next week.